There was lots of points where if someone had come along to me and said, Nick, I can make all this go away, I probably would have taken them up on the offer.
It all washed out in the end because Moonpig was a structurally very profitable company.
A lot of people, when they sell their company, they feel a feeling of regret. 6 months after that deal, I had no regrets about having sold it. You don't want to sell a company and look at it afterwards. If it sold for billions, I think I sold too early. Actually, it's done well enough that you're very happy with the deal, and not so well that I regret having sold it.
Pleo is a leading European business spending platform. Pleo helps companies say goodbye to expense reports, chasing receipts or reimbursements by providing them with smart company cards that can control and track all their spending in real time. You can say goodbye to losing receipts, track and integrate with everything. If that sounds too good to be true, why not try them out for yourself and get your next team lunch on Pleo? Head to www.pleo.io/leaders and book a demo after this episode to see why we're such fans. If you're thinking about buying someone a personalised card or a great gift, nowadays the brands Moonpig and Photobox are the first to pop into your mind. But of course, it wasn't always like this. And over 15 years ago, two founders set off, unbeknown to each other, on similar paths only to come up competing, meeting a few times, and in the end, working together to corner this market. Nick Jenkins sold Moonpig to Photobox for roughly 120 million quid, and went on to become one of the best-known angel investors in Britain after his stint on BBC's Dragon's Den, so we'll be covering some angel investing questions in this episode too. A few years later, Graham Hobson's Photobox exited for around £400 million. But how did these two companies go from fiercely competing to working in harmony, and how did those negotiations go? More to the point, I know you're all wondering, who did better out of that deal? Well, these are exactly the questions we plan on answering in this, our first release of a live recording from our Secret Leaders live series. So please get ready for Angel Investing and the Art of Negotiating an Exit with Nick Jenkins and Graham Hobson. We hope you enjoy.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good.
So for the first 10 minutes, because of course what we want everyone to do is actually listen to Nick's episode in full, because it's awesome. I'm going to pull out a couple of snippets of conversation that we discuss in the episode so you guys have some kind of idea of what to expect. So, Nick, shall we start with Russia? What were you doing in Russia and how did that help shape your career? Who were you working for? Give us some insights there.
Okay, so I ended up in Russia because I got 2 Ds and an E at A-level, and I couldn't do law, and so I ended up doing Russian literature at a time, and then by the time I finished doing Russian suddenly became quite a useful language, and so I was asked to go out to Russia and go and set up a business, set up an office for a company out there.
And for the company out there, the company was Glencore.
So I started out selling forklift trucks, and I did that for about a year. And then because I by that point, did speak Russian. Well, actually, I spoke Russian when I got there. I just couldn't understand a word they said back.
What's the Russian for forklift truck?
It's грузоподъемник. There we go.
Don't say you haven't learned
something. Do we
something
have independent verification?
Yeah, we have Russians over there, good.
There we go. Грузоподъемник. So I could speak Russian, I just couldn't understand what they said back to me for about a year, so business was slow. And after about a year, I kind of got into it. And then I got approached by Glencore. What was Mark Rich then? And then became Glencore.
And so Mark Rich is quite famously this sort of, caricature of what an evil megalomaniac, type of tyrant boss would be in the media, certainly. Is he like that in real life?
Now, when I think back, I used to have to go and report to him every 3 months, and he was at the top of this sort of glass, very secure building with lots of security and lots of sort of ex-Mossad bodyguards, and at the top of the town, and I always remember him having a white cat, but I can't remember whether or not that was just a figment of my imagination as I look back, and he was, yes. But he was a bit like that, yeah.
Okay, so he was actually a bit of a crazy bastard.
No. I mean, he was very bright. He was very avaricious.
What is that in Russian?
I don't know. We say avaricious. It's in Russian. Actually, I don't know that word in Russian, but I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they're not. But he was. But he wasn't the greatest moral example, perhaps, but he was very smart.
Okay, so amongst other endeavours Nick has been through, I think it's very important as part of the journey. You have the founder of a company that most of us have obviously used, very successful, widely known. The assumption is absolute genius, overnight success. How did they get there, Nick? So that everyone knows that's not true, can you please explain the story of your shirt collars?
Yeah. So my first business I set up at university, which was a dress shirt business, for doing all sort of the university parties. And it was dress shirts with screen-printed designs of Tintin, Dennis the Menace, and Lenin on the back of them. They were hugely popular, sold like hotcakes. The problem was when I'd asked them to be made, the shirt maker asked me what shirt size I wanted, what collar size I wanted. And I hadn't actually done any research on that, so I thought, I don't know. Well, I was a 15. I thought I'll have some 15s, 16s, 17s, some 14s, and some 13s, whatever. And nobody has a size 14-inch neck. So I ended up with, although I sold all of the ones in the usable collar sizes, the only thing is I don't know why the Cypriot shirt maker didn't say to me, Nick, no one has ever bought a size 14-inch neck shirt. Maybe you should think about this twice. Anyway, I lost my shirt, literally, on that one. I lost about 200 shirts on that one, and that was I had to again get a job after that.
Okay, so after you had your experience with Mark Rich in Russia, you, as I remember from the episode, you went off to business school. Is that correct? Off to Wharton?
I wish I'd gone to Wharton. I had to go to Cranfield instead.
Oh, Cranfield, yeah. So not quite as good.
No. I went to Cranfield because they didn't make you do a GMAT test.
Okay.
They just said, can you pay the fees?
And
yes.
What were your what was the thing that made you go to? Yeah, clearly you'd just been working in Russia.
I mean, you've got to be able to sign your own name, and on the check.
And is that where you came up with the idea for Moonpig?
It was, yeah.
And how did you come up with that? I mean, how many crappy ideas did you have before you had Moonpig?
I had 4 crappy ideas, and that was the least crappy of the lot.
Can you tell us what's even crappier than Moonpig?
So I had this idea of getting Russian biochemists to grow exotic mushrooms for sale in supermarkets, sort of truffles and things like that, not hallucinogenic ones. And but then I figured that you'd probably just get screwed over by the supermarkets. As I've discovered, having been involved in the supermarket business, in the food business now, that's true. They just sort of squeeze you down to a barely acceptable level of margin. And then the other one was gyms within companies, large companies in the city. I thought it'd be great if people could, set up a gym in the company. What I realized then is that nobody wants to sweat in front of their colleagues. So that wasn't going to be a huge success either. Funny, I don't think it is. I don't think there are many gyms inside people's companies. And I think there was one other that was. I think it was kind of an incubator, but I realised that was more of a property play. It was a sort of set up a kind of a WeWork type space, but with accounting and this and the other. But it was anyway. Moonpig appeared to be the least silly of them.
And so, in a nutshell, obviously, we'll fast forward the story, but you ended up selling Moonpig to Photobox.
Yes.
How long did that process take from coming up with the idea of Moonpig to literally the day you sold?
It was 11 years.
And do you feel like people approach you talking about this journey as if it was just some overnight success that just happened?
No, but people, they look at a company from the point at which they became aware of it, which is probably several years down its development, and they're not aware of it when it was sort of struggling away. Moonpig didn't really become. It was 6 years before. I think we had 300,000 customers in 2006, which is when we broke even. So that was probably 6 years where nobody was really aware of us.
And very important question: who came up with a jingle?
Actually, rather mundane. It was the ad agency. They said there'd been a bit of a gap, a pause, and nobody had done a jingle for a while. I mean, and they do work, but they come into fashion and out of fashion, and no one had done one for a while, so we just got in there at the right time. Now there are lots of irritating jingles.
And you're just one of them.
Yeah, I'm just one of them, yeah.
But the one that people remember.
We got into the sort of subliminal consciousness of children from the age of 3. I mean, I went to do a talk at a primary school once, and when I mentioned Moonpig, all of them, a bit like sort of, like as if they'd been brainwashed, also, moonpig.com. I thought, wow, we really have taken over. It's quite frightening.
What was your insight with Moonpig? Because obviously we'll come on to this a little bit about how that became so relevant with what Photobox were looking for. But what was that point of difference? What do you think made you special?
Well, it was the fact that, particularly, and it's a very British thing, we like sending cards that are a bit rude, a bit sort of cutting edge. And I used to send lots of cards, Tipex out the caption, and write something far ruder on the front. And then when you personalize it, people, they never throw it away. They stick it in their fridge. And it could be as rude as, the ruder the better. If it doesn't work in America, they sue you, which is why we didn't have a business in America. We tried in America, and it all became very bland. I mean, people just say, "Happy birthday, John." But I mean, everyone knows what personalization is. I mean, there's no magic there. But what we used to do is allow people to be very clever by weaving in someone. A good birthday card is all about being very relevant and being sort of. It's because you know them well enough to be able to say this. And it's a combination of humor and allowing them to weave someone's story into it. So we did that very, very well.
So one of the things about Secret Leaders that we try to get with our guests is discussing the tough moments as well. So without going too much into it, of course, because again, I want you to listen to Nick's actual episode. Can you share some of the really hard moments in your journey? Maybe something that really stood out as make or break for you and how you dealt with it?
There was one particularly difficult period. Unfortunately, it lasted from 2000 till 2005, and that was. But it was that whole point of when there was lots of points where if someone had come along to me and said, "Nick, I can make all this go away. Please just hand over the keys and it'll just all disappear as if it was a bad dream." I probably would have taken them up on the offer, but no one ever made me that offer. I think the worst thing, and this founders will identify this, is the difference between employees and founders. When we were absolutely on the brink, we owed about £500,000 and we'd got someone who was going to put some money in. It was a company, but then they'd had a delay in their process. They were the only people interested in funding it, and there was every chance they could have pulled out of the deal. And I had to go away on holiday, and no, I didn't have to go away. So I planned to go on holiday after celebrating the deal, but of course the deal had been delayed. So I thought, well, all I'll do if I stay in the office is just wear a hole in the carpet. So I went away on holiday and carried on working at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning till 8 before we started skiing. And I just remortgaged the last of my flat to pay everyone's wage bill. I had nothing left at that point, nothing left at all. And the marketing director called me and said, "Do you realize you paid my salary a day late? Do you realize the inconvenience that has caused me?" I think, fucking hell. I mean, do you realize what it's like to mortgage the last of your worldly possessions in order to pay your salary? No. I mean, he didn't last long. But it was, that kind of brought it home. That was one of those, when you realize that when things get really, really bad, you are on your own.
Okay, so before we get our next guest up here, what was, and he might have a different version of events here, but what was the first moment you made contact with Photobox?
Actually, I went back and looked at the first email I had from Graham, and it was 2004.
Oh, so literally the worst period of his life, you were involved.
It was about May 2004, and because I'd got to know someone who knew them, and we were both in the kind of digital printing thing, and we ended up doing quite a lot of the printing for the particular type of printing that they hadn't got the kit for. And so we'd been in contact ever since then. Then eventually, I think they bought their own presses to do that later on. But we'd been in touch for a long time, and then we sort of got back in touch at the time of the sale.
Okay, so before we touch on that part of the story, we're going to welcome Graham up. But before we do that, we have, maybe with audio, maybe not, so I hope your eyes are attuned to the subtitles here, just in case, but a snippet of Graham's episode, which is episode 3 of series 1.
Like a lot of entrepreneurial activity, it started because I had a need in my own life. I had 2 young kids at the time and took lots of pictures with my wife. So I bought a Sony camera, just found that there was nowhere to get prints. And I thought, well, it can't be that difficult. The real driver for me was I wanted the service. If somebody else provided it, I would have been perfectly happy. Started to write a business plan. I wrote it on the tube on the way into work. We were just kind of winging it.
So from writing a business plan on the tube to selling his company for a reported but never yet agreed publicly amount of around £400 million, can we welcome the co-founder of Photobox, Graham Hobson, to the stage? So we're going to start off by confirming that those are the facts or not.
Around that number.
Around that number, okay. We'll confirm that it's around that number. Okay, not bad. So Graham, your story is, of course, slightly different. Everyone has their own version. Now, as Nick was working for the potentially evil, maybe not, Mark Rich, megalomaniac in Russia, you were working for the evil banks.
I was.
Can you tell us what it was like in your heady days at, was it Merrill Lynch?
Yeah, so I'm a technologist. I studied computer science at uni, left there, went to work for London Stock Exchange, Baring Securities, and I met Nick Gleason, the guy who brought down the bank, because he sat opposite me for a while. Then went to UBS, and then finally Merrill Lynch. And at that point, I'd been working in investment banking technology for, 11 years or something, and I was ready for a change. I think I was 35 at the time. I'd accumulated some kind of experience and confidence and a bit of savings and was desperately bored. And there were two things
Were
that
you the
drove me
only
to it.
person that was bored of working in a bank in the 90s?
Well, apparently not, because I recruited my partner from there as well.
Okay.
But two things. One was IR35, which was coming in, which was like going to penalize me for being a contractor. And the second thing was they were scrapping dress-down dress code. So I thought, there's no way I can go back to wearing a suit
Just so everyone knows,
every
that
day.
scooter in the corner is Graham's. So yeah, this is part of the dress-down outfit.
So I think I was ready for a change. The dot-com boom was happening, and I wasn't kind of thinking I must do something. I must do an idea on the internet. But this idea came to me because I needed to print from a digital camera, and I just couldn't find a solution. And I thought, it's a piece of technology and it's a printing machine like you see in the back of a chemist, so it can't be difficult.
So before we get on to exactly it can't be difficult, because I'm assuming it was probably a little bit more difficult than you expected, I just want to let everyone know that one of our guests up here is pretty much a convicted felon. So Graham, can you tell us about your terrible, dark history?
I think convicted felon is a little
it's
strong.
rich. Yeah, it's definitely hyperbole, but it's the suspense.
So I went to uni in 1986, and that was the year that War Games, the movie, came out. And you're probably all too young to remember the movie, but it was all about modems and hacking and setting off the Third World War, and I just thought it was amazing. My parents had a flat in Florida. My dad used to work out there sometimes. And if you went into a Radio Shack in the States and bought a phone cable, you got an hour of CompuServe time for free. So I used to buy these cables and sell them to people at uni because they got online time for it. So I was just really into that. I went and bought a modem kit from Maplin, built my first 300 bits per second modem, and then proceeded to kind of try and find my way into any system I could. So I accidentally hacked into a US system called The Source. I found some kind of local terrorist cell on it, and anyway, I got a call from US Naval Intelligence. They came to my door in Rickmansworth and confiscated my computer and gave me a caution. So that's the closest I get to being convicted.
It was a worthwhile part of what makes you as an entrepreneur, I guess.
Yeah.
The Photobox days. Now, again, one of those, is it a 16-year overnight success?
Yeah.
Yeah? So over that period, so Nick talks about the worst period of his life being, or certainly professional life anyway, being the 5-year stint of difficulty. Do you relate to the 5 years? Was yours longer, shorter?
I think you can kind of interchange our stories, actually, just change a few names and it works. Definitely that period. I think when I started in the year 2000, I knew a lot about tech, but nothing about marketing. And we all expected an overnight success with the way the markets were going. And I guess I had two lows in that first 5 years. One was we failed to raise money in the summer of 2000, so we kind of burnt through our first £500,000 really quickly, and then couldn't raise again because the markets were collapsed. And somebody came along and said, "We'll bail you out, we'll put in £1 million," and the money just never turned up. For about 6 weeks, we were chasing it, and it's another long story about money laundering, but it never turned up. And we were about to burn out. So we went and raised 100 grand from kind of friends and family and some existing investors. And we went into small business mode and basically hibernated for about 3 years. And that wasn't what I signed up for, running a small business. And because we didn't know anything about marketing, we just didn't know how to accelerate it. And there was no Facebook, there was no Google AdWords, there weren't a lot of levers you could pull on. We could could print flyers and leave them in tube stations, which is actually what we did. But there wasn't a lot else that we could do. Banner ads didn't work, never worked. I don't know why anybody sold a banner ad. And then I guess the second dip of that was exactly the same. 2005, I'd sold my car. I'd remortgaged the house to the absolute limit.
Still haven't bought another car. Same mode of transport for the last 12 years.
I, gave up holidays and posh coffees, and I just said to Mark, my partner, who had managed to drag into this, we've either got to raise more money or just give up and go home. And luckily, we did the first one. So.
And as I remember, you ended up trying to buy a company or do a merger, but the whole thing sort of fell apart and you ended up in quite a complicated situation. Can you give us a little insight into that moment? Because I think that's actually one of the key experiences that is unique to you and also probably not.
Yeah. So I think whenever you're dealing with investors, you need to have a really kind of simple story to tell them. And our simple story was, we're going to expand. We're a market-leading photo company in the UK. We want to take the formula into Europe, and we need to raise money to do that, and we're going to go and buy an existing player in Europe. So that was the simple story, raise and buy. So we went and found a small Swiss company. There was only like 7 people, but they were already covering 12 countries. So they were like an embryonic, pan-European photo company. And we said to them, we'll buy you for this price. We're about to do an IPO on AIM. And they said, great. So we agreed terms. We flew over to Geneva. And because we had no money, we were basically doing the due diligence ourselves. And I immediately dived into their database, started to query all their orders, check how many orders that they shipped each year, all that sort of stuff. And noticed that they'd never paid any VAT or never charged any VAT on any of their orders. And I said, how does that work? And they said, well, we're Swiss. And I said, but you're shipping to Germany and printing in Germany. How does that work? And anyway, they didn't know that they had a huge tax liability, which was basically the value of the company. So the deal fell apart.
So just for reference, we're Swiss is not a credible argument, it turns out.
No.
This podcast is brought to you by Klaviyo, the growth marketing platform most recommended by other business leaders, and last year 67 new brands switched to Klaviyo every single day. From a shopper's first impression to each subsequent purchase, Klaviyo understands every interaction, empowering brands to create more personalized marketing moments. When you have a 360-degree view of your customer, the growth possibilities are endless. Klaviyo truly understands how challenging it is for each and every entrepreneur to get their business off the ground. The cost of acquiring new customers is continuing to rise. Brands are experiencing diminishing returns as well as a small audience reach. Their marketing efforts are continually being squeezed. But Klaviyo is helping brands take back control by leveraging their own marketing channels like email, web, and mobile to provide exceptional customer experiences. Klaviyo continues to help hundreds of thousands of business leaders just like me grow globally. Visit klaviyo.com/leaders, that's KLAVIYO.com/leaders today to find out more. Now back to the show.
I think that paints the story quite nicely because you're starting to talk about expansion and where this all came from. So it's probably time to start talking about the process of selling to your competitor. So I think this is sort of broken up into different angles, really. But I guess one of them can be referred to as the dance, the sort of flirtation period where you two would have come into contact with each other. You mentioned it was 2004?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was that first contact? How did that happen? And did you walk away from that thing being like, oh, that Graham is just an arse, or he's the best guy ever? Like, what was the memory?
What happened there was that we were hemorrhaging cash, and we were desperately in need of any cash that we could make. And you were also hemorrhaging cash, I believe, at the time.
Was this the story you told each other at the time?
Well, no, we didn't mention the hemorrhaging cash bit, but I mean, actually, it probably would have been very cathartic if we had done. So they had loads of, I think it was sort of Christmas cards and various other things that need to be printed on card. and we had the kit to do that.
We had
and
one Xerox photocopier to print our cards, and it got to a point where we just maxed that out.
So we had the kit to print. So what we realised is it was just a bit of extra revenue for us to cover some of our costs. There were disadvantages to this. So we were used to basically selling hilariously rude birthday cards, one-offs, generally one-offs, and so nobody could really notice any colour differences in the printing process. Whereas most of the things that were being sold that we were doing were wedding pictures. I think a lot of wedding, actually not Christmas, it was wedding. There were the problems were with the wedding pictures, where professional photographers had used the service to print off wedding pictures, and we weren't very good at printing black. And of course, with lots of morning dress, there's a lot of black on there and white flecks appearing on it. And the other thing is particularly pedantic photographers saying, oh no, but the Pantone shade here is 2 degrees off where it is on the first card and the 100th card. And anyway, so there were quality control issues that we'd never come across, because basically our thing was all about how funny is the joke. And so that it worked for a bit, and then I think you just decided to do your own thing. So the initial relationship was all about us desperately trying to find some way of making a little bit more money to pay the rent, and then we kind of went, didn't out of contact really.
They had this really posh giant machine though, which we thought was awesome. It was the size of a mini metro, and it was capable of printing huge numbers of cards. So we had a little van that would go back and forth with, a zip disk and a box of cards coming back. And sometimes the van wasn't available, and I went on my scooter down to Lots Road and dropped stuff off. So.
And I cursed it once, because I came back and I did a trip to Australia to set up our Australian operation, came back and realised we've got this massive backlog of stuff, including loads of your stuff. And I worked for 3 days without sleeping to clear this backlog and your stuff occasionally would just, for some reason, would get stuck in it. And it was, I remember it well.
Not fondly, it would turn out. Okay, so at this point you've met each other. How do you formed any kind of bond? Were you let's go out for a drink? Was it just over email? Were you friendly in any kind of way? Set the scene. What is this first interaction with you both like?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think we were both so desperately busy with our own businesses that the last thing on our mind was going to the pub and having a pint. I think we just both recognized similar souls in a similar stage of their lives, fighting with this growing personal baby that we needed to feed all the time. And so yeah, that social side of it wasn't there. I think we treated each other like suppliers. I was supplying cash, you were supplying cards, and that's how it worked.
And in retrospect, do you feel like that's one of the most common and most meaningful ways to have an exit, to actually be working with a partner in some respect in the first place? Yeah,
I remember discussing it, and I don't quite know how it came up, but it was probably around 2005 or 2006 maybe even, that we had a CFO, James Longley, and he had a chat with you, and I think he felt there was some deal there, and he came back to me with a number anyway. I don't know if it ever came directly from you.
No, I think there was a point at which, if we could have sold the business in 2004, 2005 for a modest amount, we would have been delighted. Simply to have come out of bankruptcy would have been a good thing.
Do you remember what the modest amount was that you were floating?
I've got funny if you mentioned it the other day, but
anyway, I remember James coming back to the office and he said, if you want to buy Moonpig, you can buy it now, and Nick wants 2 million quid. And I said, fuck off, we haven't got that kind of cash, and there's no way a few old cards are worth that.
Yeah.
So when was that?
That was maybe around 2005.
2004, because in 2004 we had a down round. We'd originally raised money at a valuation, the highest money, we raised money at 5 million, and then in 2004 we had a down round and we raised money at a pre-money valuation of 1 million.
Okay. And you were trying to sell it for 2, and that was in 2005 or so? 2004, sorry.
2004,
and then when did you actually exit, what year?
2011.
And 2011. So there was a £118 million discrepancy.
Yeah.
Okay, so when framed like that, how do you feel about those next few years that ensued? What was the turning point to get £118 million difference in value over such a short period?
Well, the difference is breaking even. the moment that we broke even, you suddenly think, right, that's it. We know we're going to survive. and we've got patience. We can carry on going. Because we were always growing at about, we were growing virally, sort of 20, 30% a year, but we just simply had to survive. But there was a period in 2004 when I was worried that we weren't going to survive. So frankly, if anyone had said, I'll give you $2 million for the business, I would have taken it.
And that 60 times multiple sounds, sounds funny, but when I think about all the things that we valued about the business in 2011, none of them were there in 2000. Well, very few of them were there in 2004.
Yeah,
and Nick was still there in both scenarios. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not sure if he liked that joke. he's still processing it.
No, I'm always a great believer in when you come to when you come to sell a company, you don't want to be seen as an utterly valuable part of the team. It comes down to my dribble and shake theory.
Can you share the dribble and shake theory?
So my theory is when you come to sell your business, you don't want to have to stay there for another 3 years working for somebody else. So you want to give the impression of being a complete cretin because they think, well, this business is fantastic. And imagine if this cretin wasn't running it, it would be even better. So then they say, no, honestly, you can leave on day one. You leave now. We'll give you a taxi. So I didn't have to stay on afterwards.
So were you not amazed that this person that had come to you in 2004 with his business worth £2 million, who'd quite impressed you, had suddenly, in 2011 or whatever it is, turned into a complete moron with £120 million value? Was that not one of the most confusing moments of your life?
To be honest, I outsourced the negotiation. So we had a new CEO in 2011, Stan, who'd been there since 2006, and he was the one that was talking to Nick quite regularly in those years. So, Stan was telling us what was going on with this deal.
And how long did you have to stay? I mean, how good was
About
your artist's interpretation of dribble and shake?
Oh, I took the money and left. So straight away, with ushered out of the door.
I think you left before, didn't you?
Yeah, well, actually,
you probably got a phone call on a yacht or something.
My argument was actually that I'd spent the year because I'd handed over to a new management team so that I could spend the time on the deal. So at the point of the deal, there was no day-to-day work for me left to do. So I disappeared off.
Well, let's go through the deal then. So the negotiation period.
Yeah.
Do you remember what that was like, and how long did it last, and how did it make you feel? I mean, these are the kind of things that you sort of hope as an entrepreneur you're going to experience at some point in your life. And so, take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, so you start looking for all the obvious candidates as trade buyers. When it comes to say private equity buyers or VC, and your corporate finance advisor knows those people well, they know what they're looking for and they deal with them. But when it comes to trade buyers, you generally know most of them. So you'd call, so I remember calling people at Vistaprint and saying, we're both in the digital printing business, let's get together, have a chat about printers or something. And because you both know what it's just a little bit of a dance as you get to know each other and you gradually sort of, lift your skirts a little bit to show a little, you need to understand a little bit more about their business and whether or not you would fit within their strategic framework and try to understand whether it would make a deal. Now, the really interesting point about Photobox was that we were a much bigger business than Photobox. So when I first started talking to Stan about them, the idea of them buying us, if you looked at it on paper, you'd think, well, hang on, but this is a company, I think it was, it wasn't really making any money at the time. And we were making about 11 million a year. So it seemed illogical. Of course, if you actually look at it another way and say, well, if you put those two businesses side by side and brought in a whole load more money to fund that, then yeah, that would work. Sometimes there are deals that are possible. And one of the reasons it also worked was because Stan was effectively been hired as a CEO by the venture capitalists. So for him, he didn't have a controlling stake in Photobox. So for the idea of him putting those two businesses together then made him a CEO of a much, much bigger company, and with all the stock options and things that go with that. So that was an attractive deal. He had a bigger train set to play with. Had it been you on the other side, and you thought, well, I now own 51% of my company. If I buy this company, I'll own 15%, and I might get thrown out of my own company before I've had a chance to. So it's different dynamics. So understanding the psychology behind it and what's in it for both parties is quite important.
Was part of your process personally that you just, I mean, it sounds to me, you had the bigger revenues, you were profitable at the point, you were bigger in every way, like you said.
Yeah.
But you were totally on board with the idea of being bought and put within the Photobox group. Does that just come down to a personal preference? As in, were you just like, you know, I'm going to do this whole dribble and shake shtick and bugger off because I've got other things I'd rather do in my life? Is that basically the point where
I think I got to the point where I'd added as much as I was going to add to Moonpig. If I'd stayed on any longer, it would have been out of laziness more than anything. And it was a question of finding a good home for it where it would thrive. Now, I mean, obviously, there's always a moral, difficult point. If someone's going to offer you 150 million quid and there's a chance they might trash the business, and someone else is going to offer a really good home but offer you 80, I'd probably take the 150. But actually, if you generally speaking, you've got a range of companies that would do a good job of it, and I could see that Photobox was a very well-run business. And
talking about culture integration, though, so obviously you didn't stick around for the culture integration, but I guess a question I have, being an animal lover, is you used to have a pig that you would walk around Tower Bridge,
we
correct?
had an office pig, yeah.
Yeah, you had an office pig.
What
happened to the office pig when you took it into Photobox? Did you have to inherit 2 pigs?
We inherited some micro pigs.
Yes, they weren't that micro by that point. They were actually about this big. When we got them, they were that big, and a year later, they were that big. And we had a license from DEFRA, because in order to do this, we had to turn the office into a farm and get a farm license. And then we had to get a license for animal transportation. So we had to get a license to walk them around the Tate Modern lawn. But they refused to cross the road, so you had to pick them up and carry them across the road. And after a while, it became impossible to carry them, so they went back to...
And was this one of the more attractive things that, made you want to buy Moonpig? Like, we get to carry these giant pigs, which is totally on Photobox brand.
Yeah. But there was a strong culture at Moonpig. So, I mean, the rational side of it for us was that Photobox was growing, but we were VC-backed, and we were 5 years into having raised VC money. And we knew that the investors were looking for some kind of structure towards an exit. And we got approached ourselves to be acquired by a much bigger company in 2010. And it got really close to happening, final SPA agreements, personal contracts, everything. And at the very last moment, it fell through. And we reflected on what had gone wrong. And when you're about to be acquired, you don't actually control the deal much. All you can do is do things to improve your odds, right? So we reflected that there were things we could have done to have a better outcome. One of them was have more of an auction, to have multiple parties interested in buying us. But also to have things like IPO as an option. So we came to the conclusion that we were too small. I think we might have been turning over about, 80 or 90 million at the time, but that ruled out a number of things. We were too small. We had this one huge seasonal peak that a lot of potential buyers saw as very risky. We basically did like a third of all of our revenue and all of our profit in 3 weeks at the end of the year. We were very focused on one particular product vertical, which people might have thought was a bit limiting. And anyway, we just thought there is a solution to this, and it's called Moonpig. We can immediately double in size. We can have 2 major product verticals. We can have 4 peaks a year, and we can have a recognizable brand in the portfolio. And there were a few other benefits as well. So I think that's when Stan kind of got on the phone and started schmoozing you a lot more. And so it made perfect rational sense.
Just speaking about, you just touched on brand here, like how important do you think the fact that you turned Moonpig with that jingle, with that incredibly successful TV campaign, how important do you think that whole bit was? Forget the revenue, forget the growth. Just that alone, do you think that was really meaningful in this transaction?
It always used to amuse me when people were writing about it afterwards, when they would say, Photobox, owner of Moonpig.com. And they always, so it was because Moonpig was the brand that was known. I think when we, in 2006, when we broke even, we had 3% awareness in the UK. We used to do a Murray poll every year to work out our awareness in the population, and it was over 90% by the time we sold. So it was pretty well known.
Nick talks about going back to a school and talking. I was invited back to talk at my comprehensive school on speech day, and when I got there, they said, "Would you mind just talking about Moonpig, because that's all the kids know." So I got up on stage, and some 14-year-old with an oboe or something played the Moonpig jingle.
Must have been a very proud moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, of course, we had a lot of there was a lot of sort of content attached Whereas in many respects, Photobox is more of a service. There was a lot of content attached to Moonpig in that we had a lot of humorous, really amusing greeting cards and so on. So it was easier to build a brand based on Moonpig.
Okay, and just Graham. Now, as I understand it, Nick did the whole dribble and shake dance, so he gets to sell his company and then just up and leave. Awesome. Your story is slightly different. I mean, you've just done this transaction. Do you get to go to the pub and celebrate, or is it like another night working until 11 p.m.? What's it like to buy the company? Like, we've heard how great it might be to sell it because you get to bugger off, go skiing, have a lovely time. What about the person that buys the company? What's the reality like?
So I think it's a totally different experience to be a founder who sells your company than be a founder who buys a company.
And in retrospect, which would you rather be?
Well, I got there eventually, right? But it's all I saw was Nick and a small entourage of people around him went off into the sunset to do these amazing fun projects with bags stuffed full of cash.
And they left you with the pigs.
And I was left with the pigs, with integrating a website on a completely different tech stack, no big founder share sale. And so it was a different experience, that's for sure. I mean, I can't complain, right? I had...
Were you bitter at all at the time?
I had good advice from people, and since 2006, which is when we did our first merger and acquisition type deal, where we merged with a French company, I progressively got to sell a few shares every time. And these things just paid down the second mortgage and all these sorts of things. So over time, I was gradually de-risking. And the Moonpig deal was actually quite good for me because we managed to move house in the middle of it. And I remember being on the phone to the estate agent and on the phone to our CFO, like, can I do this or not, kind of thing. But it wasn't a life-changing event for me, but it was for you, and mine came later.
Okay, so from your point of view, you then had to stay at the company, or wanted to, of course, the company that you founded, for how many years after that transaction? Another 5?
Another 5 years, yeah.
And the moment where you actually sold, what was your process like? Looking at the process of, you by that point bought a bunch of companies. How different was your process in selling the company, do you think, from having been on both sides of the table?
Well, first of all, I think, you buy companies because they make a lot of sense to buy, to add to yours. There's got to be synergy there. There's got to be shareholder value. You can't just take, a 120 million quid company and 100 million quid company and make 220. It's got to be worth more than that, because otherwise you just keep them separate. It's easier. So you've got to find a way to extract that synergy. I remember trying for about a year to figure out how we could get synergy out of the tech platforms and just couldn't do it. And in the end, we left Moonpig completely separate. But we did find quite a lot of synergy in other areas like manufacturing and some marketing and product evolution. Yeah, and Jersey, which is Guernsey, which is another story, which we might come on to later. But we did acquire some other businesses. We acquired one in Spain that gave us a tremendously big boost to profitability. They were a company that wasn't growing, that were the largest photo book producer in Iberia, but added a lot of profit to the bottom line. And we bought a business in Germany to give us, effectively we were European market leaders, but we didn't have any presence in Germany, which was a bit weird. So we did that because we knew that in our future story that would be important. So there were quite a few big deals, a few smaller ones. And you just keep at it, keep working at it. But there is a cultural piece as well, and the Moonpig culture was unique. I know there was a little bit of tissue rejection going on at the beginning because the Moonpig culture was, hey, we're having fun every day and we're having parties and we have pigs in the office. And we, by comparison, we were still kind of startup culture, but we were very boring by comparison.
There was quite a stark difference in the two offices. It was very, one was very utilitarian. And the thing is, by its very nature, we spent, if you have to come up with lots of amusing things each day, you can't all turn up to work in suits and ties and work in a dull office. So we had to create that atmosphere. And that merging those two was quite interesting, because in the end, you ended up in that. I remember going back to visit the new office when you merged it back in Southwark, and actually I thought you did a really good job of combining the two cultures.
But the Moonpig culture won. In the end, we just ended up expanding the Moonpig culture around ourselves. So.
Yeah, getting more animals, turning into big farms.
Llamas.
Yeah, exactly.
But as we went through M&A, we had to kind of make some of those cultural shifts to make it work.
And then whilst you were busy grinding it out, trying to turn this acquisition into a big, meaningful exit, Nick swanning off on BBC, becoming a dragon on Dragon's Den. So how did that opportunity come about, and how did that make you feel? Jealous, he's a bastard, exactly. That says everything you need to know. 'Cause he knew you were on it, he just didn't want to look at it. Yeah, sure.
Now, how did it go? It came out, the BBC just called me out of the blue and said, would you like to do it? And I mean, there was an element, you had to go and do a screen test to work out how you come across on television.
Well, they ignored that then.
And they completely ignored. They couldn't find anybody else, so they came back to me. And I, at the time, I just thought, no, why would I want to do that? And then I figured, I used to watch it when it first came out. I thought it was great fun. And I remember being quite young watching it and thinking, I'd love to. Wouldn't it be great to be a dragon? And I thought, well, I might as well say yes, because if I do it for a season and don't like it, I can always just stop it. So I did it, and it was a blast. It was really good fun making it. The downside is you end up with lots and lots of small businesses to look afterwards. But.
What was it like actually working with Deborah Meaden? Is she as pleasant as she seems in real life?
No, Deborah Meaden is made to look like this sort of ogre on telly, but actually, she's a neighbour of mine down in Wiltshire, and we get on really, really well. She's delightful and very funny, but it just doesn't come across. They deliberately don't put that across.
Okay, so Graham, you've like, whilst this is all going on, obviously you're going through a transaction, trying to get to your exit. You're now both out of the companies that you founded. Is there like a whole like relief experience of that? You know, it's in the past, you get to move on. Like, what are you doing with your time now?
So, well, these deals don't happen overnight. There's always many months of lead up to the deal and many kind of changes in direction and even with the private equity sale that we did in early 2016, it started mid 2015. There were a few false starts, and even like about 2 or 3 weeks before the end, we thought it might not happen. There was a major spanner in the works that we lost a lot of sleep over. And I think when the day came, I'd never had that kind of big exit before. I didn't know what to think. I remember walking across Millennium Bridge, and I phoned Mark, who'd been out of the business for 4 years at this point, and I said, "Well, it's done. How do you feel?" And he said, "Yeah, great. All that." And I was chewing gum, and I stopped the phone, and I suddenly did this sharp inhale of breath, and I thought, "Oh shit! I've just inhaled a piece of gum." And I got back home and said to my wife, my wife said, "Oh, let's go out to eat, like just normal, go out." And I said, "Do you know what? I feel a bit weird." So on the night of the deal, I spent 4 hours in A&E, and I hadn't inhaled a piece of gum at all. So,
so completely psychosomatic.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, and that didn't obviously happen to you because you were just out, done, clear, fine.
No, but we also had a hitch at the last moment that nearly derailed the whole process. Thank you very much. Drinks on tap, it's fantastic.
Yeah, you obviously just looked like you needed it, frankly.
You got water, I got beer. Brilliant. So the thing that nearly derailed ours is that I had this mate of mine from university who'd invested, and he was living in Malaysia at the time, and at some point, and he'd set up a Malaysian company to do his private equity investments, and he'd owned the shares of his Malaysian company, Cahaya Legenda, it was called. And anyway, he then moved to Australia, and he kind of slightly hadn't really paid much attention to the paperwork on this company. At the very last moment, as we were about to do the deal, one of the lawyers just went to check that all of the shareholders actually exist. And they discovered that Cahaya Legenda had been struck off the list of companies on the Malaysian share register. And it's simply because Johnny had moved house in Australia, and the Malaysian partner's been saying, "You've got this little company that owns a few shares in some tin pot little company called Moonpig, hasn't had any transactions in it. Do you want us to strike it off?" And he didn't answer for about a year, and they struck it off. So in 1 week, he had to fly to Malaysia and get a company reinstated into the Malaysian equivalent of Companies House, which would have taken months and months in Britain. And I don't know how he managed it, but that would have derailed the deal.
So I guess from lessons learned, always check the paperwork.
Yeah.
Yeah? And do you feel like as the entrepreneurs, that's very much your responsibility? Do you trust lawyers enough to do this, or absolutely not?
I think the first time that we did a deal was 2006 when we merged with this French company, and the lawyers said you're going to spend about 12 hours in a room. And I couldn't believe, I'd had 3 kids at that point, and one of the labours was longer than 12 hours, but the other 2 were less. And I thought it can't be 12 hours for a legal agreement, and it was 13 hours the first time. And you just sit in this room and work through endless amounts of paperwork. So it's unbelievable.
So, sorry.
But I do think you have to be absolutely on. You've got to be on top of it, because they do occasionally miss things.
And were there any, like in retrospect, do you remember any, we won't call it foul play, but, any moments between your deal where what you said was it slightly different to the reality of what you were going through? I mean, now that you're both there, you can obviously admit that you were.
I can't remember anything about this deal. I remember another deal we did, where it was actually, the one in 2006, where we thought there were a lot of issues with the French company. And they were like, no, it's all fine, no, those millions of credits we gave out, they're expired, and basically everything we worried about turned out to be true in that one.
Was it too late?
Well, we just had to fix it. It was our company at that stage, so...
So yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay, before we move on to the next bit, which is the art of angel investing, so you can give some tips to those looking to angel invest, and also maybe some advice from those looking to raise money. Can you, obviously, not just Moonpig in terms of good humoured things that people print. Can you remember some of the funnier things that people might have printed? What were some of the more ridiculous things in your experience that you remember? There must have been some pretty outrageous stuff, especially for you, Nick.
Well, we had...
Not what you printed.
We used to have a screen on the wall, and as people uploaded photographs onto greeting cards, they would live just pop up on the screen. Every once in a while, of course, there would be an erect penis, so after a while we had to stop these things coming up live on the screen, because we'd be in the middle of a meeting and suddenly... It didn't happen that often, but it just happened often enough in the middle of meetings to be a problem. And every once in a while, we would get a card that would come through the system, and we think, well, we probably can't print this. So it would go to senior management. So senior management would sit and think, can we print this? I remember there's one card, which was a magazine spoof front cover with 5 pictures on the front of a chap whose better half was being filleted by someone else. And the caption on the card was, "You bastard, you gave me VD." And which, to be fair, Clintons don't have a card for that. So we wrote back to him, and we looked up his customer account. It turns out he was actually a very good customer. So we said, "Dear Mr. Soso, thank you very much for your recent order. We do feel, however, that perhaps it might contravene our obscenity rules, and perhaps we feel that on this occasion you might find another way of expressing your sentiments to your friend. And as we meanwhile refunded your card, and we look forward to seeing you on the site very soon." He did come back and buy again, but that was one of the few cards that we actually had to ban.
And Graham, I presume you had a lower tolerance level for what you would ban?
We had similar stories, really. We used to have something called Smut Patrol, because people just treated it as a game to upload pornography to us, or their own personal pornography, which I think Mark called Boudoir Adventures or something like that. But anyway, we'd see those as a ticker across the bottom of the screen, and occasionally we'd spot stuff that we had to intervene. I do remember one of the worst times was we printed a naked calendar for a German customer and accidentally shipped it to the wife of one of our investors. And that actually was the biggest problem. It was not shipping it to the person who'd ordered it, it was getting the orders crossed. So, yeah.
Hey guys, I want to tell you about LaFosse Associates. Not only do I and many of our secret leaders use them for hiring tech talent, but they have an amazing new academy teaching people how to code for free, and then they help place them in tech companies too. In short, they're exactly the type of company you want to work with when searching for talent in your companies. That's www.lafosse.com. Now, coming on to the serious bit. You've now both exited your companies. You're both prominent angel investors in the UK. I
I guess let's start with the high-level stuff. Like, how many startup pitches do you reckon roughly you see per how many you actually invest in? We'll start with Nick, because I guess you must have seen way too many being on a show like Dragon's Den.
I mean, the thing is, I get to see hundreds in a year, and I probably only invest in 2 or 3 in a normal year. When I was doing Dragon's Den, it was about 5. You can only do about 2 or 3. So very often the rejection is not look, this is not a good business idea. It's more that there's a limitation on what I can do each year. There's a limitation on what you can keep an eye on, and so it's not that only 3 out of 100 pass the muster. It's more that I try desperately not to do angel deals, and unfortunately, at least 3 out of 100 make me break that rule. So it's, I often go into meetings, and there's one in particular, so I'm not going to invest. You go, oh, that's really interesting, and end up investing. They're all interesting, and they're all fascinating. It's just that you can only do so many in a year.
And Graham, do you have the same attitude? Do you think they're all interesting, they're all fascinating, or do you only invest in ones that elicit a certain emotion?
Well, not really. I had a burst of activity. So I did some really tiny deals going back to 2007, and it was more like helping out a mate with the grant or something like that. I've done about 30 in total. And I have to say, as an investment strategy, it sucks. I've only had one return, and that was the grand, 1,000 euros, came back as 8,000. But 5 or 6 of the companies I invested in have gone bust. Most are in the doldrums, and so it doesn't work as an investment strategy. I do it to support young entrepreneurs who are passionate about what they're doing, because I was on the receiving end of EIS investment in 2000. So I had this burst of activity. I've stopped a lot of that now because it does take a lot of time, and you can't afford to do a lot of due diligence. And a lot of companies you invest in have follow-ons where they want you to participate. So I keep a little bit in reserve for that. Occasionally somebody pops up on the radar where either I think that sounds amazing, or like it's some 19-year-old entrepreneur who I just think this guy's putting everything into it. But actually, I'm focusing more on social impact these days. But it's occasionally, and how many do I get? I get them like 3 a day on LinkedIn, even though I have that note saying, please don't pitch me, because I only invest in things where I know them already.
Okay. And if you've done 30, how many have you done, Nick?
Actually, no, 27.
Okay, very similar. And as a percentage of your, net wealth that you're willing to invest, what does that equate to?
Well, I think it probably doesn't make so much sense to have more than 10, 15%. You need to be able, the critical thing is you need to be able to say, it's not working, I'll walk away from that. If it would hurt you, if it failed, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
And
well, I'll do it in absolute terms. I think I probably put in about 600 grand to angel investments, but it's probably worth about 490 right now. So, yeah.
Okay, so you need to take some tips from Nick in that case.
Well, I mean, I had a couple of big wins, but things that can skew the figures a bit. And I had a big win on a New Zealand software business that quadrupled in 18 months, which has compensated for some of my failures.
But that's the way it works. You need to, every investment you do, you need to believe it can be 10 times return, or you wouldn't do it. Because you need 10 times return from 1 or 2 out of 10 to pay for all the ones that fail.
Yeah, and I'd say it's the same. I'd say the same about 1 or 2 out of 10 will give you a really decent multiple. And some of them have the good grace to die immediately. And the ones that are, the painful ones are the zombies in the middle, who every year, we need more money.
Isn't that technically what happened with Moonpig?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, I got to a point where none of my investors would put any more money in. Yeah. And of course, I speak to them now, and they say, I wish we put money in that last round. I go, I bet you did. So with a lot of those things, it's very difficult when they are in that stage. You think, is this a Moonpig moment of 2004, where this last bit of money is the bit that's going to nudge it over the edge? Or is it a bit like one of the other, sort of less successful ones I've had, where you just keep on putting good money, throwing good money after bad?
Well, actually, there are 4 levels that our VCs talked about. There is 0 failures. There's Instagram. there's the zombies, and then there was reassuringly boring. And that's what Photobox was. The investors would come along every 3 months, pat us on the head and go, okay, they're never going to make us, 20 times return, but they're profitable and they're growing and, okay. But they gave us like 5 minutes attention every few months.
But I mean, if the stage above that is Instagram, would that make Moonpig Instagram? The Instagram of the card?
Moonpig was not an Instagram. I mean, Moonpig, to put it into context, we put 2.7 million in, and in total, when you take all the dividends, we took 150 out, because I think we paid out about 30 million in dividends before we sold. So that was a reasonable, it's a reasonable ratio, but it's not Instagram.
And I guess the thing that I pick up on that is essentially, you've just said about, the zombies and what you don't look for in an angel investment, yet it's actually the experience you personally went through. So do you think that's because you know how much you personally sacrificed in your journey? You talked about, all those mortgages on your homes, etc., to pay the marketing director. Do you think you know how much you suffered to get to that point, and when you compare it to other people in that zombie moment, they haven't suffered as much, so you don't have as much conviction?
I generally like to invest in people who are prepared to put some skin in the game. The real difficult thing is when someone comes along and says, look, I've got this great idea, but I haven't got any money, and I'd like you to put £1 million into it. And you think, well, if this goes wrong in a month's time, there were lots of times when I would have given up with Moonpig, but I couldn't because I'd invested everything I owned in it. I had so much at stake in it, and I didn't give up, and I fought because of that. And if I hadn't had anything invested in it, then it would have been a lot easier just to say, I'm sorry, this isn't working. So the skin in the game bit is really important to an investor, because it keeps somebody fighting for longer.
Okay, so before we go to audience Q&A, and I know we had some questions already on social media, which our beautiful assistant Rich will be reading out for us. I guess I just wanted to ask a couple of final things. The first of which is, what are your top tips? Boring though they may be, Graham's already warned me that his are going to be boring because, he is the pat on the back type. But what are the top tips on securing an exit? So it'd be interesting to get your perspective. And then the second question is, what are your top tips in angel investing, like what to look for and what to put your money in?
Okay, so securing an exit. So first of all, we'll probably agree on some of these. Just keep talking to everybody that is a potential acquirer or a company you would merge with. Always be out there networking and building those relationships, because one of those people could be that exit. I think you've also got to keep an eye on the story you're telling, the narrative. At some point, you're going to go out and raise money, or you're going to, have this pitch deck to sell the business, and it's got to show. I remember ours very well. It said, this is what we do. This is the market we operate in. We've had, 25% compound annual growth rate for the last, million years. And, it's all looking rosy. And these are the vectors that will get us to another 10 times growth in the future. And you have to tell that story, but you have to deliver on all of the component parts necessary to prove that you're on that track. So you have to constantly think about, where are you going, and am I tracking the right line? And if you're not, then change the story or actively take steps to get to where you need to be. You can't just rock up 2 months before you want to sell a business and say, hey, we think it's going really well, but buy us, because you have to tell that story.
And the thing about not over-promising is really important, because during the course of the sale, if you've promised that and you're actually delivering that, you're constantly on the back foot. The other really important thing I remember is that you always have to have more than one offer on the table to make it work, but the second offer can be business as usual. So if your backstop is, look, we could just carry on running this for profit, and we'd be perfectly happy. You have to be perfectly happy with not doing a deal. Because if you've already bought the house in the Cayman Islands and you've already booked the tickets to get out, then you're overcommitted, and you're overcommitted to an exit, and you have no other option. The option, your number, in the absence of anybody else bidding, your second option has to be business as usual, and that's your backstop, because that's the point at which you say, well, screw you, I'm not taking that price because I'm better off not selling.
That point about over-committing, though, or over-promising, is really important because all deals get delayed by months.
Yeah.
And if you're into the period where you said I'm going to be at this level and you're well short of it, then lots of questions get asked.
And they will chip away. So whereas if it's the other way around and you said that and you're actually doing that, then that you can just ratchet the price up.
Is that what happened in this scenario?
No, I think we were actually absolutely on track. We had a really, really good modelling system. So we knew exactly what we were likely to be doing in a year, plus or minus 5%.
6 months later was a different story, though.
Yeah, so just before,
yes, okay, yeah.
so just before there is a funny story involving Guernsey, not Jersey, it turns out, of a technical difficulty that you had with tax.
So all deals, in my experience, have had a technical difficulty with tax. So we had one with Delaware in 2016, we had one with Switzerland in 2005, and we had a major one with Moonpig in 2011.
Yeah.
Which is Moonpig benefited from special tax jurisdiction in Guernsey, where there was no VAT.
Because it's actually a UK rule that was, and then a European rule that was brought in. It was a European-wide rule, actually, that says we won't bother processing international transactions under 18 quid because actually the cost of processing was less than the amount of money that would be collected. It was designed to save money and to make things more efficient. The problem is people took advantage of it and started setting up. You think, how can I send something into the European Union from outside the European Union, and take advantage of that VAT thing? And okay, hands up, I did that. And because of course everything we sold was under 18 quid, so we set up in Guernsey, and it meant that we didn't have to charge VAT on our cards. And the difference to that was, our turnover at the time was 45 million quid, so it was 20% of 45 million quid. It's quite a lot of money.
Yeah, but Graham's problem, not yours.
No, and we had this discussion during the negotiation. We had a discussion about how likely is that to happen. And the thing is, it actually made no sense for the government to remove it. We weren't thinking about whether or not someone might do a little bit of political posturing. And the problem was that what actually happened in the end is that I think the Chancellor felt that he needed to be seen to be having a win, even though in reality they didn't make it. They didn't save any money by doing it, and that's why it got removed.
And how much did it cost you, Graham?
Well, it got removed 5 months after we did the deal, after all the advisors said this will never disappear. It's been there for 40 years. And there were clauses in the contract where we got to claw back a little bit from the deal.
8 million quid, I think.
8 million quid. But I think the thing was, Moonpig was hugely profitable, and suddenly to take 20% out of the retail price halved the profit, or more than half the profit.
Half the profit, yeah.
And so we would have paid half the price for them.
Yeah.
It actually all kind of, 5 months later. Anyway, it all.
That £2 million deal sounds really good right now.
It all washed out in the end because Moonpig was a structurally very profitable company, and we managed to optimize in other ways. And Guernsey Post took a lot of the hit and took some of.
Yeah, on the positive side, a lot of people, when they sell their company, they feel a feeling of regret because they lose a sense of identity and everything else. 6 months after that deal, I had no regrets about having sold it. So, but the good thing though is the very fact that we can share a saver. Photobox did a wonderful job of running the business and actually completely recovered from that and did various things. And Moonpig performed very well. I think it's delivered. It's one of those rare examples where both sides, you don't want to sell a company and look at it afterwards. If it had sold for billions, I'd think, I sold too early. Actually, it's done well enough that that you're very happy with the deal, and not so well that I regret having sold it. So it's kind of a nice somewhere in between.
True. Okay, and then the last question, which was your top tips for what you look for in angel investments, like the top 3 things that you just go for.
Okay, so the main things that I go for, I go for things which I look first of all at is there any evidence that people want it? Can you actually make much margin out of it? And then is it scalable? And then, of course, the critical thing is this the right management team to deliver it? Those are the 4 things that I look for. I've seen lots of things that are wonderful solutions, but nobody actually wants to pay for them. I've seen wonderful solutions that you can't really make money out of, and I've seen wonderful business ideas run by people that you wouldn't trust to sit the right way around on a loo seat. You've got to get those four lined up.
So there's people doing the dribble and shake too early in the negotiation period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't show yourself to be accredited when you're raising money. It's when you exit. Okay. Very important to get that bit right.
Okay. So that was your fifth piece of advice of what you look for. And
well, I think all of those, for me, the healthy unit economics is really important. I think you've said it before, you want to see people that are all in on this. They're risking everything to make it work, because it really cuts down on the due diligence if you think these people are really risking everything. I look for a good deck. I just want a clearly expressed view of where they are, where they've been, where they're going. What was the other thing? I like to see evidence that there's a hypothesis there that they've taken steps to prove. Because for me, the scaling stage of Photobox was a completely different company than the kind of proof of concept stage. And I would be nervous about diving in before they've even proven whether somebody wants to buy this thing. And the final thing for me is, if you did the maths on my angel investments, I invest quite small amounts of money in most of those companies. So I look for companies that are worth less. They value themselves at less than 5 million. If they're over 5 million, I raise. It's just too much hassle to do the due diligence and to think about where they're going.
Okay. You had one other point to add?
No, I tend to also invest in companies that are certainly around about that level, because there has to be the fun in it. There has to be a carrot. This thing could be huge. There's no point in investing in something that has a very likely chance of doubling. Otherwise, you might as well buy shares in British Gas. But the other really important thing is I like to invest in people that I want to help. I want to support, because if you're going to be of use to them, you're going to spend time with them, and you're doing it as a kind of I think we both agree it's the hobby side of our investing, and it's the you want to be helping people you enjoy spending time with.
What do the founders of Calm, Planet Organic, Photobox, Moonpig, Shazam, Mumsnet, Last Minute, WeTransfer, Albright, and the School of Life all have in common? They all put their brain first and start their day with Heights. Heights is the smart supplement for brain health and cognitive performance, using plant-based, natural ingredients designed to help you thrive. Listeners of this show can get 25% off their first month with the code LEADERSHEIGHTS at www.yourheights.com. Next week on Secret Leaders.
I Googled, found nutritionists, found James Collier as now our co-founder. 2 weeks later, he gave me the formula for Huel, which is pretty much identical to what we got today. Every supermarket's got food which is optimised for taste, and we're optimised for nutrition. The primary purpose of food is nutrition. It isn't taste. You can live without taste, you can live without any texture, but you can't live without nutrition. So it's quite bizarre how everything in the food industry is all focused around taste.
That was the rather impressive Julian Hearn, the founder of Huel. Huel is one of the UK's fastest growing companies. In 4 years, its growth has overshadowed everyone else, hitting £40 million in sales, and they're on track for £60 million this year. And all for a concoction he made up to be a meal replacement, therefore creating a whole new category of food. After 4 years of privacy hiding in his office with laser-sharp focus, he's finally stepped out for some vitamin D. So we did the only logical thing we could think of. We shoved him into our dark office studio and milked him dry for all the insights, as you'd expect. Tune in, or you'll miss out. We hope you enjoyed this episode. It was brought to you by me, Dan Murray-Serter, producer Rich Martell, editor Harry Morton of Lower Street Media, and marketing by Hannah Russell of Mags Creative, and stunning visual design by our talented designer Christina Naru of smartupvisuals.com. You can check out show notes, transcripts, and our upcoming live events on our website secretleaders.com. If you've not yet, please hit subscribe. Leave us a review, tell a friend, take a screenshot of this episode and add it to an Insta story. I mean, you know what to do. And tag us at Secret Leaders or at Dan Murray-Serter, and we'll add you to our story in appreciation back. Rich and I put together Secret Leaders for free because we love our day jobs as entrepreneurs, but every time someone takes the time to share it, it means a lot to us. So don't forget, it's the little things like that that keep us coming back every week and every year into the studio. See you next week. 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 See you next